So it seems that Lieutenant Demetrian Titus has finally got a 40k datasheet, and what's more, it doesn't even seem to be Legends. Let's talk about how the Star of Space Marine 2 can perform on the tabletop. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd do a focus video on Lieutenant Titus, as it seems that in a slight surprise reveal, Games Workshop just added his datasheet to the download section for Warhammer 40k. He's got an official stat line and points cost, and will be running around giving some Space Marines sustained hits. Pretty much everyone will be very well aware of Mr. Titus right now. He's of course the hero of the Space Marine games, previously a captain in the first one, cast out to spend some time in the Death Watch in the interim, and now back as a Primaris Lieutenant, redeemed to fight and win against the Tyranids and Thousand Sons. He did a rather good job of that, despite being dispatched with 2 men and no more no less, as that's all Mr. Akaran could spare. As a result of Space Marine 2, Titus is probably the single best known Space Marine character right now, just due to that game having hit the internet hard and had a reach far beyond the normal 40k fanbase. That's probably not going to change anytime soon as well, given that he's the star of that new secret level animation coming out on Amazon fairly shortly, which will be providing another chapter in his story after that game's finished. As a tie-in for the game, Games Workshop made this model for Lieutenant Titus, because as we know, Games Workshop absolutely loves releasing Lieutenant miniatures for the Space Marines. To be fair though, it would have been a bit remiss if they hadn't bothered for this guy. He's hefting his chainsaw over his head, leaping forward to put the finishing blow on some Xenos or Chaos, no doubt. His armour and his chainsaw is a little bit more beaten up and battle damaged than your average shiny clean Space Marine, and you can recognise him by his heraldic shoulder pad and the chains that he wears around his right wrist. I feel like as model sculpts go, it maybe wasn't the single best received one that Games Workshop have done, maybe a slightly mixed reception, though I feel like it does the job. This week it finally seems that they're putting him on full sale for people to actually buy, which did seem like a bit of a dumb decision to do that so far after the Space Marine game have released, though I'm sure there'll be plenty of hype. First off, he came out in a Target Space Marine 2 box with a bunch of Termagants in the USA. If you can find that, that's still the best way to pick him up. Then had another small mini release in a Recruit edition of Space Marine alongside paints and some more Termagants, though this week is finally going on full sale but direct only from the Games Workshop web store. So he won't be available at discounters, or at least not initially. They're apparently also using him to promote their brick and mortar Warhammer stores as well, where if they've got stock of him, then apparently if you buy him now, then you get a £10 voucher on Warhammer 40k things for spending after Christmas. I feel like that seems targeted to try and get people who've tried the Space Marine game to paint a model and then come back to try more Warhammer things. I probably wouldn't travel too far out of your way until you've confirmed whether or not your local store has stock. You might be able to get in touch with them though, either via calling up or on social media. Rules-wise, it did seem likely that he might get some support, given that there's no rules for a lieutenant with a chainsword in the core codex, that bit due to no model, no rules from Games Workshop. I was wondering whether it'd just be a Legends datasheet, though at first impressions at least it seems not. Getting into the rules, I feel like that's probably the first place to start with. For his download, it looks like he's in the same rules section as things like the Vespid Stingwings and Tempestus Aquilons, which are very much official main 40k datasheets, so are intended for competitive play if you want them. Given that he's appearing side by side with them, that implies that he is too. They do have a legend section of the downloads, and he isn't in there, and there's even a specific Ultramarines legend document, and he's not in that either. On top of that, his datasheet doesn't say legends on it when all the legends ones do. I found it interesting that his file name that you can see in the top of the web browser, that one says Promo Legends document, and that kind of implies that they might have decided to change Lieutenant Titus from being a Legends model when they drafted the rules to being a fully fledged datasheet for mainline 40k. And at the moment he does seem tournament legal if you want to run him, though my guess is that from initial impression he might be a bit niche. Legends things aside though, he's 70 points to field in game, and for his core rules he's an Ultramarines character and attaches to most of the squads that you'd expect. He can't go with any of the firstborn units, so no attaching to Tactical Marines nor Devastators. He can't go with Desolation squads either, and some of the Primaris characters are able to attach to them, but it seems that he wants to go with something that's a bit more happy to get up close and personal. He's got the choice of regular or assault intercessors, Blade Guard, Stern Guard, Infernus Marines or Hellblasters. Perhaps surprisingly, he doesn't have the ability to attach it to the same unit as a Captain or Chapter Master. That's maybe a little bit of a shame, as I would have expected that would have been an option for him given that he's a Lieutenant. He does put the damper on a couple of combos if you wanted a great big power unit perhaps, though if you desperately wanted to pair him with an enhancement or something, you could do that by fielding an Ancient, though they aren't exactly the strongest datasheet for the core one that's just in Tacticus armour. Otherwise, nothing too unexpected on the character keywords. He's an epic hero, so only one of them. He's got grenades, and he's got the Tacticus keyword himself, so that means that you can get in some transports, but not others. His stat line's fairly much as you'd expect, basically a standard lieutenant one, but with 5 wounds rather than 4. He doesn't have any sort of invulnerable save, though he does get a 5+ feel no pain, and that does mean that between those rules he is quite a bit harder to kill than your average lieutenant character. With average rolling, you'd have to chew through around about 7 or 8 wounds off him, rather than the 4 wounds of a standard lieutenant. That typically only matters though if he's basically already on his own, and in general things aren't going particularly well if that happens. For his damage output, he gets a heavy bolt pistol, not exactly much, but adds a single AP one shot at 18 inches. The main event is of course his melee, and there he gets an Astartes chainsword, 8 attacks at strength 4, AP 1, damage 1, all hitting on a 2+, but getting the anti-infantry 2+ special rule, and he also gets sustained hits from his buffing ability. That means that on average he'll get as many hits as he gets attacks, so he should be landing 8 hits on the enemy as normal. But it is a bit unfortunate maybe, his chainsword isn't really going to be very general purpose, as it's got low strength damage and AP, so while you're going to be having a good time against hordes and the like, you're not going to be doing too much against anything tougher. I feel like perhaps they could have been a little bit more generous with the profile, maybe giving the chainsword damage 2 I think would have been reasonable enough. The Blood Angel's captain gets that, and I feel like that could have made him far more interesting, and not just feel kind of inferior to a standard Space Marine with a power fist. For his average damage output, he kills around about 5 or 6 termagants or enemy guardsmen. He does around 3 wounds to standard issue Space Marines with a 3+ save, 2 wounds to Terminators, and is just generally worse against monsters and vehicles where that anti-infantry 2+ rule doesn't kick in. He's definitely going to make a mess against lighter infantry, but if he runs into anything with a 2+ save or high toughness that isn't infantry, he's really not going to be doing much at all. Finally, for his special rules, he gets a Fights on Death one, Honour the Chapter, the same as it is in Gladius I guess. This one is for him personally, it triggers on a 2+ if he is killed in melee and he hasn't already fought this phase, so to get to swing one last time with his profile. I guess meaningful if you're against hordes and things that killed him in melee, but less so if it's something dead tough. Again, it's not really a rule that has that much upfront value unfortunately, given that it only takes effect if he's killed in a very specific way, and it's more of a consolation prize for losing the model. Overall, I'd say it means his biggest selling point is his buffing rule, which is called Press the Attack. Weapons equipped with models in this model's unit have the Sustained Hits 1 ability, and that applies to both range and melee attacks. Kind of interesting that this one isn't just keyed to while he's leading a unit. Lots of characters only get their buffing rules when that happens, such as say the Lethal Hits one for regular lieutenants, so he still gets it if the rest of his squad is being shot out from under him. Sustained Hits 1 is nice enough. Usually it'll equate to a plus 25% damage boost for a Space Marine unit that hits on a 3+. Basically, it's a stronger buff than lethal hits if you're wounding on a 3+ or better, far worse than lethal hits, which is an extra plus 50% damage if you're wounding on a 5+ or worse, and mathematically even to it if you're wounding on a 4+, and it can have a bit of interplay with the unit's other special rules, like anything that already has sustained hits won't care about this, but anything that has devastating wounds might like sustained hits a bit more than lethal hits, as that skips the wound roll. I don't think he's going to be particularly interesting going off and doing lone character shenanigans unlike some out there in 40k, so that kind of begs the question as to what sort of units he might want to lead or buff. Basically it's the question of what likes that sustained hits better and might be able to make use of a bunch more chainsword attacks. I feel like Hellblasters might be one of the more obvious ones. They like sustained hits on their big plasma guns, and it could be a viable alternative to lethal hits, basically making them double down against things that they're already kind of strong against and they wound on a 3+, as opposed to trying to make them more well-rounded with a standard lieutenant, and the lethal hits keeping them far more relevant against tanks and vehicles. I feel like typically given that choice in other armies, people often tend to want to go for the more well-rounded approach if you've got a big scary damage unit, as they won't always have the choice of just shooting against an optimal target. But it feels like it could be an argument for them. In Gladius Task Force, I think you're still going to be better going with the whole fire discipline combo though, with a regular lieutenant with the lethal hits, and he can also get sustained from that. And I would bear in mind that the regular lieutenant is a little bit cheaper and also comes with the fallback and shoot ability, which can genuinely be pretty handy for Hellblasters if you don't have that from elsewhere. Otherwise, beyond scary marines with big plasma guns, the assault intercessors could do okay. This would have them stacking a lot more attacks and just have them absolutely double down on anti-horde duties, though arguably they do already do that quite well with their mass chainswords. People often tend to pair them with a character that has a bit more hitting power that can also make use of their wound rerolls and punch up against tougher stuff. Stoneguard could be another okay choice given that they like their devastating wounds, so getting sustained hits is quite good there. It could make them a fairly scary unit for Overwatch as well if you wanted to. Perhaps the main disadvantage is not being seen as all that strong currently though. Again, they do seem like a better choice overall. Bladeguard I think are going to be more likely to profit from lethal hits given their low strength but good AP and damage, so unlikely to want to pass up the regular Lieutenant, though again don't seem awful for him. Infernus Marines don't really do sustained hits, and Intercessors in general don't really need leaders that much. I feel like you're probably going to be better off with one of the others versus them. Overall, for first impressions at 70 points, unfortunately I don't really think he looks all that strong. Not unusually bad, but as with a lot of Space Marine things, just seems to have competition from all the other good characters that you could use. And I think that if you wanted to use him for any one battlefield role, there's a pretty good argument that you could make for a different character. The main issues I think are that sustained hits is roughly equal or worse than lethal hits for a lot of units that he wants to lead, bar maybe Sternguard. His own damage profile really focuses on anti-horde, which doesn't tend to be something that Space Marines struggle with too hard given that they got a lot of basic strength 4 attacks anyway in melee. His fights on death rule isn't really the best given that it only adds value if he's slain, which is already kind of a bad thing to start with. It only works in melee as well, and only if he hasn't fought, and even then it only really matters if it's against lower save infantry type targets, as otherwise he's likely just going to be chipping a wound or two off his targets that the opponent won't care about. I think it is a shame that he can't combine with captains and chapter masters as well, where he maybe could be a little bit more of an interesting take in a bigger unit. Overall, between all that, I don't think he's going to make it into competitive lists with this kind of stat line. It's really not unusually bad if you want to put him on the table in more casual games. I'd be tempted to have a go with either Sternguard, Hellblasters or Bladeguard probably, but my guess is that he probably won't be all that competitive at this points cost. I think if you wanted to make use of the model, I don't think too many people would object to just playing him as a regular lieutenant with a counts as power sword or fist. Just pretend he's hitting extra hard with that chainsaw maybe. I feel like the rule of cool factor is enough to justify that for me. But either way, I do think it's fun that Games Workshop has got round to making a proper datasheet for him, and I do think it's a positive that it's not a straight to Legends one, which implies that unlike some of the other units they've released rules for, like that Celestian Sacrosanct Avalyn or Off-Tac Blackhawk, his model might be a part of the more permanent Space Marine range, and he could well get a proper place in the Space Marine Codex next time there is one. He really doesn't do much to deflate the trend of a crazy amount of Lieutenant datasheets and a huge amount of Ultramarine characters, though given he's made such a big impact on Warhammer 40k in general, I'd certainly not go denying him a spot. In any case, let me know what you make of him. Would you be tempted to put him on the tabletop yourself? Is he good enough as is, or does he either need a points cut or a different sort of special rule? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, including any details of new rules or rumours Games Workshop posts. And finally, if you'd like to help support the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description down below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.